Good day, YouTube. I am here with Scott, and Scott and I work together. We have a lot of conversations on something that he's doing, which I'm excited for him. He's done a lot of great things in his Air Force career. That he's going to be applying for officer training school. And what I wanted to do was get an updated version of how that process is today, because that is a very popular topic on people who are already in the Air Force and applying for OTS. So if you want to just tell us how that process has been with you and share the latest and greatest.
Okay. Yeah, so I started the process back in June of this year, and so now it's November, and it's finally coming to fruition with submitting the application to the board. But it's taken a full 6 months to make sure that you have your AFOQT, which is the test you have to take, your transcripts, your application all squared away, the interviews with commanders. It's just a really, really involved process. And the guide to do it is like 70 pages on just how to submit the application, submit it correctly. And in that application, there's certain things that will go ahead and disqualify you immediately upon submission, so you didn't even get a chance to meet the board. So it's just one of those things where like the fine details are the utmost importance on this whole thing. So it's been a while.
So from the beginning, like you said, those details are very important in the sense that you have to pay attention because it's a competitive process.
Yes.
Or they'll be like, okay, this is over. Is it a lot of effort overall?
It's not so much effort. I think the things that require the most effort would be taking the Air Force, I forget what the acronym stands for, but the AFOQT. It's like an ASVAB/SATs kind of exam, and for a lot of folks that haven't taken that test and experienced like the time crunch that that test is designed to put you in, it can be very stressful. So with the AFOQT, I definitely recommend that should be your first step to go ahead and start studying for that kind of environment. Take the practice test. There's 100 resources out there. Your base education office has multiple resources, base library, but then there's also third-party civilian kind of test prep things that definitely set you up for success. And I would suggest taking that as soon as possible because you only get to take it twice, and if you fail the first time, the second time will be your only time, and then you actually have to take a college class to go ahead and be able to take it again. And those test scores, they feed into a whole person concept. So if you score poorly, you can take the test again and get better scores. But if you get okay scores, it's not a deal breaker.
Right. So he talked about AFOQT, Air Force Officer Qualifying Test. He also mentioned the Education Center. How are they involved these days?
So the Education Center, they are just a really good guiding point for bouncing questions off. They redid how everything is accomplished this year. So some of the stuff on the official form doesn't get filled in, and your base education office will be able to tell you, like, hey, don't fill this portion in. If you look into this page on the application guide, it says don't fill it in. But then also there were other questions that I came up with, like, do I need my CCAF transcripts? And so that was a good question to ask the education office, and they sent it down to AFPC and sent it back up. So they're just a really good resource for answering questions, because even though there is a 70-page guide, there's still things that come up with questions.
Okay, good. And we've also talked about interviewing. How has that process been with you?
So the interview process has been pretty good. Luckily, with my role within my organization, it's been a pretty smooth sailing process, mainly because of some of the jobs that I've had. Your squadron commander will be your first interview, and they fill out a portion, I think it's like 20 or 22 bullets, demonstrating and highlighting your leadership abilities. It's kind of like a letter of recommendation, but in bullet format, and that's usually done by your squadron commander. The second interview that you should have or will have will be with a commander above your squadron commander, so like your group commander, wing commander, or somebody else in your chain of command. The TFOT, the Total Force Officer Training Guide, is very explicit that a letter of recommendation from a wing commander or a group commander should be personal to you, and have direct knowledge of your actions and their impacts on the organization. So like for me in my programs, a lot of my programs are wing programs. So an interview with the wing commander is definitely within my wheelhouse. But if I was, an E3 security forces member or E3 medic, my chain of command may top out at, my group commander who I've had limited interactions with. Mm-hmm. Going further than that would really press the issue and kind of degrade the letter of recommendation, is what the TFOT guide says.
Okay, and is that the guide that you were talking about? That's about 70 pages?
So that's like 70 pages, and there's like 6 or 7 attachments to it, and it references AFIs. So going through all the stuff that I've had to go through, so I had certain waivers that had to be filled out, and those waivers had to be coordinated in conjunction with other AFIs. So it's a 70-page outline of how to do it, but then when I got into the weeds of some of those waivers, it was like another 100 pages of stuff that I had to go ahead and sift through and make sure that I was doing it correctly. So that TFOT guide, it has, like I said, the 70 pages of how to fill it out, what jobs and this and that kind of stuff. There's questionnaires and checklists that are attachments to that. And then there's also an overall master checklist that shows you the mandatory disqualifying stuff. Mm-hmm. So, for instance, on one of the things, it's a 3-page maximum for that application. If that application exceeds 3 pages maximum, then that's an automatic disqualifier. If this box isn't checked, that's an automatic disqualifier. If if you indicate that you should have some paperwork but you don't have it, automatic disqualifier. So it's extremely intimidating and a huge project to undertake. But the guide really sets you up for success. Mm-hmm. You just got to go through it and be diligent about it. Like I said, it took me 6 months to go ahead and get my stuff squared away so that I could have it be there. And every week I would go ahead and print out those questionnaires and those checklists to make sure that I was meeting my goals and keeping on target. Mm-hmm. And so it wasn't until 2 weeks prior to submission of the package that I finally had all of my boxes checked appropriately.
Good. So pay attention to that application process, because before we get into the next question, because I have another thing, is how the boards, how often are they happening? We'll get to that in just a moment. Because it's time consuming, but at the same time you want to be able to meet that board whenever it happens, because they're not happening often, and he's going to answer that in just a moment if you have that info. Mm-hmm. But he mentioned something that hasn't changed. Those bullets, and a lot of it will depend on leadership. What do you bring as a potential officer candidate in leadership? Because a lot of people want to be officers, but it could be for a lot of different reasons. And it goes back to something that he brought up, that it was the exact same way when I went from enlisted to officers, that leadership ability, correct? Mm-hmm. I don't know if you want to talk about that. You can. If not, do you happen to know how often those boards are happening?
So for this year, there's only... For this year, there's one board in December, and that actually meets in February. And then they release the result, or in January, and then they release results in February and March. Mm-hmm. For the fiscal year 20, I believe they have 2 boards. One's in April and one's in October. So you really have only a few instances to go ahead and be one of those non-specialized degrees. Now, if you're going for, I believe, if you're going for one of like special forces, or if you have like a specialized degree to be like MD or nurse or a meteorologist or one of those like highly specialized degrees, they can meet any of the boards, I believe. There's a different category that those fall into, and your education office will be able to answer that question for you.
Okay.
As far as the leadership aspect of things goes, it's proven history of leadership. At least this is my understanding of things, and speaking with other individuals that have been picked up for it. It's proven history of leadership, and then leadership potential. So if you have a bunch of folks that are out there and you have a really awesome, medic that just wants to do awesome medic things and doesn't have that drive or have that desire and make that desire and drive publicly known, mm-hmm. It's going to be hard to speak to the potential of that individual. So that's definitely something to take into account.
Okay. Have you come up with a list of jobs that you would be interested in?
I have, and so some of the jobs have special requirements. So, like for me, I'm colorblind. I can't do space for whatever reason. Mm-hmm. But they have the TFOT guide breaks down based off of your academic code for whatever your major is, and it tells you that you are entitled or allowed to apply for those specific things. So I have both kind of management degrees, mm-hmm. and so that allows me to do it's kind of a catch-all for a lot of the AFSCs. So I have force support as one of them. I have logistics readiness and then acquisitions and then intelligence. And there's a catch-all on most of those categories that allow you to do that. Now, if I was going to be like an environmental engineer, I'd have to have a specific degree in engineering that would fall into that numbered category that they have. And that's all public knowledge. If you Googled, I think it's the CIP code, it'll come up with a whole bunch of them, and then you can find what your degree falls into.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. And I'll leave it up to you with any words of wisdom, advice that you may have for anybody who watches this.
The one thing that I would say is if it's definitely something that you want to do, make sure you talk to your family. If you're married, it's a significant, it's a significant commitment, not only just for you and your career, but your family is also along for the ride. So make sure that you're doing it and doing it for the right reasons, and then it's worth it on the backside. The other thing too is it's an extremely intimidating and arduous process. Like 6 months of it always being on the forefront of your brain. Make sure that you take the time to go ahead and do that stuff and take care of your package. Print out those checklists, bite it off a chunk at a time, and go through and do that kind of stuff. It's extremely intimidating and overwhelming, but if you manage your time, which is kind of what an officer should be doing, you'll be setting yourself up for success with it.
Perfect. Thank you very much for sharing the latest and greatest with us. When I applied for officer training school, I was stationed at Maxwell, so every six weeks I would see brand new butter bar, second lieutenants. And I felt, hey, that's what I want to do. I want to try that. I applied for officer training school and I was not selected. So I did the ROTC route where I actually left active duty to be a student again, worked on my master's, and then came back on active duty. But one thing that I knew for sure was that the Air Force is a great team, at least for me. It's perfect. Not a perfect team, but it's a perfect match. I would have stayed enlisted regardless if I would have gotten picked up, if I wouldn't have gotten picked up for officer training school, and it just worked out that way. But either way, it's what we make of it. I know he's had a great career. I won't go into the details, but there's good things coming for him just down the road, and hopefully he gets selected for OTS. So thank you very much.
Thank you.